Hi, hello, and welcome to this engineering philosophy live stream. So this is the first time I'm streaming with StreamYard, so I hope everything is working as planned. Let's see. How can I see that I'm bigger than the Arvin video? Sorry for the delays. I'm just trying to figure out how I can actually change that. Okay, now it's just me. I'm sorry, now I've brought it back, but this is still not what I'm looking for. Okay. Whatever, I need to look this up later. I'm sorry, this is just me trying with my first stream. So today I'll do another video on free will, and I'll watch with you and comment on and review the Arvin video. And I'm really proud of Arvin. I really like his channel. I put the link to the video also in the comments below. And this video is really one of the best on free will that I've seen ever. Yeah, let's dive right into it.
If you've seen my videos before, then you know that one of the subjects I'm obsessed with is free will. I've mainly talked about human free will, but if we have free will, shouldn't all creatures also have free will, even simple creatures? The question I want to know the answer to is, how low in complexity can you go and still have free will? Does a bacteria have free will?
This is a really good question that I also often ask, and basically the most likely answer, in my opinion, which is described by Penrose and Hameroff's OR, is that really free will goes all the way down to the quantum level, and that even quantum particles, when they are forced to make a decision to go to the right and left slit in a double slit experiment, make that decision. So even they have a degree of agency.
Have it? It turns out that although biological systems can't break the law of physics, they seem to construct some laws of their own. They might not have free will exactly, but they have an ability to make changes that suit themselves. In other words, they have agency. Animals seem to do whatever they damn well please. Is there a method to the madness? Is there a driving force for their actions? What do we know about agency in living systems? That's coming up right now.
So I'll skip his intro just not to get into any copyright conflicts. And his AdWords.
More expertise on this subject than me, and whom I think you're really going to enjoy listening to, and that is science writer Philip Ball, a former editor at the prestigious journal Nature, who's written extensively on a variety of science subjects, not only in the biological sciences, chemistry and science history, but also quantum mechanics. So I present to you Philip Ball.
What's the difference between a living thing and one that's not alive? Scientists haven't yet found an answer they all agree on, but one thing we can say about living organisms is that they do things to suit themselves. They rearrange their surroundings for their own purposes. That's not just a matter of me manipulating a cup, kettle, and tea bag to make a cup of tea. Even single living cells act with agendas. Take the white blood cells called macrophages in your immune system that engulf and eat invaders like bacteria.
Now I can already hear the objection of a lot of people like Sam Harris that would say, yeah, but they can't really decide what they do. They're still determined by physics and chemistry. But yeah, they are. The question is just, is it all predictable by physics, or is it random like quantum effects? So the real question about this, we all are selfish and act to advance our own well-being. But is this freedom or is this determined? And I would say this is freedom to some degree and determined to some degree. And I think Arvin will agree in this video with me.
Under a microscope, you can watch a macrophage chase a bacterium across the slide, switching course this way and that as its prey tries to escape, before finally catching the rogue microbe and gobbling it up. This might sound like an anthropomorphic way of describing a biological process. After all, single cells don't have minds of their own, so can they really have goals? Biologists often insist that cells and bacteria aren't really trying to do anything. In the end, they say, it all comes down to genes and molecules, chemistry and physics, events unfolding with no aim or design, but which fool our narrative-obsessed minds. Yet our sense that the macrophage does have a goal and a purpose isn't just a story that we ourselves create. After all, cells like this exist precisely to conduct this kind of seek and destroy mission. What we're talking about here is agency.
This is a point where I need to really pause, because from here on, they will call the free will they describe agency. And I often get criticized when I describe my definition of free will that, oh, that's not really free will. And in the comment section below that video, you will find the same criticism to Arvin and Philip Ball, where they say, oh, why do you call it agency when you mean free will? And really, agency and free will are two words for more or less the same meaning. I use the word free will because I want to break this false dichotomy that there is, on one hand, they always say there's complete freedom, the libertarian free will. And on the other hand, there's people like Sam Harris that say there's no free will, everything's deterministic. And I say, no, the free will that we have is in the middle. Not everything is determined, but of course, something is determined, and we're influenced by chemistry and biology. And what Arvin does here is basically he argues for a very similar position. And they call it, Arvin and Philip call it agency. And I think that's a good word. Agency basically saying that you are an agent that changes the universe. But it's often misunderstood that agency is not free will, and it is.
Of living things to alter their environment and themselves with purpose, to fulfill an agenda. Agency is a genuine natural phenomenon, and maybe biology would be less coy about it if we had a proper theory of how it arises. No such thing exists yet, but there's increasing optimism that it can be.
There is such a theory. That's Or by Penrose and Hameroff. It's not proven, but it's there, and according to a 2019 paper by Lee et al., it's the best hypothesis, or best theory rather, that we have. And there's already considerable evidence for it, but clinical research is ongoing, and I think in 1 or 2 years we should at least have an answer if it's falsified or if there's more evidence for it. So we have to wait and see, but it's not that we don't have a theory. We have, but unfortunately not a definitely proven one.
A theory of how agency arises could help us interpret what we see in life, from cells to societies, as well as in some of our smart machines and technologies. It might even help us to understand what free will can and should mean. Agency.
This is something that I also always advocate for. I'm so obsessed with free will, not because I desperately want to have free will to console my tortured mind, as some people have accused me. The reason the question is so important is that only if we understand exactly how free we are, if we are free, we can have a very just society and a good moral and legal system. So basically, there's people that argue for free will and say if there was no free will, there wouldn't be any morality. You wouldn't be responsible for anything in your life. And I think they have a point. If there was complete determinism, you are not really free to do something, and we should maybe overthink our justice system that's very much about retribution and not just keeping people from committing further crimes. But if there is a degree of free will, and that also can change from situation to situation, so basically, if you're on drugs, you have less freedom than if you're sober, and if you have mental illness, you have less freedom than if you don't. Basically, we need to take this into account, and to some degree, we already do in our legal system say if you are mentally impaired, you're not responsible for your crimes. The problem is it's always very black and white. To my knowledge, it's only the Netherlands right now that have at least a 5-tiered system for responsibility, where they say, okay, if you're mentally impaired to a certain degree, you are more or less responsible. And in the end, we need to research this, we need to understand this, and then we can build our moral system about this. And this is why it's so important and why it's so annoying to me, because 99% of the time, people are arguing the completely wrong topic. They're saying, oh, there's no free will. No, there's absolute free will. There's no free will. There's absolute free will. Guys, both notions are obviously not in line with the evidence. There is a degree of free will. Just look into it, find out how much it is and how situations change the amount of free will we have. And that's why this topic is so dear to me, because it's so important. And most people, even most neuroscientists, are not even asking the right questions yet.
Applies what genetic hardwiring cannot. It's just not feasible to program complex living organisms for every situation they might encounter. Often they have to make choices in response to new and unforeseen circumstances. When a hare is being pursued by a wolf, there's no meaningful way to predict how both animals will dart and switch this way and that, nor whether the hare's gambits will let it elude the wolf. Both are exercising their agency.
And this goes back to an argument that I often make about self-driving cars, where I say, yes, self-driving cars have some degree of agency, some degree of free will, but to a different degree, and probably of a very different kind than what animals have, because self-driving cars, if their neural net is sufficiently complex and using a sufficiently good learning algorithm, can tackle with a lot of situations, even slightly or largely different ones to that what they have experienced. But animals show a complete different quality of being able to react to new situations. And basically, even simple animals and bacteria exercise this to a quality that is not explainable by classical computing, which Penrose calls the non-computability in his book, The Emperor's New Mind. And this is basically one of the strongest evidences that yes, a part of our brain is classical computing, and you see that action play out in machine learning algorithms, but there is something beyond that, and that seems to lie in quantum physics.
In particular, the hare is trying to escape by being unpredictable. An organism that reacts differently in seemingly identical situations stands a better chance of outwitting predators. That could also be a good way to search for food when you have no idea where it might be. You don't even need a mind to be unpredictable. Take the ciliate, a single-celled aquatic organism that attaches itself like a sea anemone to surfaces. Disturb a ciliate with a jet of water, mimicking the encroachment of a predator, and it may sometimes react by contracting and sometimes by detaching and floating away, with unpredictable, roughly 50-50 odds.
So this is one of the examples where we have no other theory than OR to explain it. It's as simple as that. It's the only theory we have right now.
You don't even need so much as a nervous system to get random. It's in selecting from this range of behavioral choices that true agency consists. That selection is goal-motivated. An organism does this and not that, because it figures this would make it more likely to attain its desired outcome. The choices we humans make might be carefully deliberated. We contemplate the imagined future scenarios if we do this or that, involving our internal mental models of how the world works and of our position within it. This ability is what we experience as free will, although, of course, is far from free of all kinds of constraints, our memories, emotions, social conditioning, not to mention the laws of physics.
So this is exactly what I also call free will. He calls it agency, I call it free will. Yeah, obviously you are constrained by the laws of physics, and obviously your past experience, memory, subconsciousness influence your decisions. But for one, they are part of what constitutes you. What basically your subconsciousness is part of you. This is something that really annoys me when Sam Harris makes arguments about free will, and where I think he's like dishonest at this point, because it's been pointed out to him so often that this is nonsense. He says there is no you, and your thoughts arise just from your subconsciousness. You can control them. One, that's not true, but mainly, yeah, but your subconsciousness is part of you. So saying that just because something comes from some consciousness, it's not free is like saying that basically if you drive a car with your hand and not in your nose, you're not driving the car. It's just stupid. Sorry to use such a hard word, but it's ridiculous.
But if we're going to ascribe agency to cells and ciliates, we can't make it depend on such elaborate cognitive resources. And so we need to ask, what fundamentally is choice all about? In the mid-19th century, the Scottish physicist James Clerk Maxwell imagined a very simple scheme for how an agent could achieve a different outcome from the one the world would otherwise spontaneously produce. Scientists at that time had figured out that all spontaneous change in the universe is governed by the second law of thermodynamics, which states...
Good graphic. This example with the two chambers of gas is something that I also often use, but fortunately, I can't afford the fancy animations. Sorry.
Change must lead to an increase in overall entropy, loosely speaking, in the overall amount of disorder among its constituent particles. It's because of the second law that heat moves spontaneously from hot regions to colder ones. In 1867, Maxwell suggested there might be a loophole in the law that prevented this inevitable slide towards disorder. He imagined an ingenious microscopic being, later called a demon, that operates a mechanism to sift hot from cold particles in a gas confined within a box. The demon would let the molecules pass selectively through a trapdoor in a wall dividing the box in two so as to gather the hot, faster-moving particles on one side and the cold, slower particles on the other.
So there is a version of that demon that does not require a conscious demon, and that would be aligned with OR. And that's really hard to explain without OR. So basically, these yellow particles that the demon lets through the other side, quantum physics tells us that basically there is a certain chance that just tunnel through the barrier by themselves. And this tunneling effect, albeit very unlikely, is something that really happens and that is used in electron microscopes, for example. So let's say the yellow particles have a higher chance of tunneling through that barrier than the blue ones. This would already allow them to sort and decrease entropy just by quantum physics. And the thing is, when you think of quantum physics, it's often like, yeah, that's random. It's just random. Random is not free will. But think of it this way. The particle, we know with Bell's experiment and other experiments that a decision by a particle to not tunnel through the barrier or tunnel through the barrier is not influenced by outside variables. It really, the decision is made by the particle. So what's more likely and what's the easier and thus for more likely explanation, that the particle has a very elaborate, complex mechanism inside that creates a perfect random number that says, okay, with a chance of 1 in a million, I can tunnel through this, and I throw the dice on it's the 1 in a million chance and I tunnel through it. That's raises really more questions than it answers if you see it this way. So we humans on a macro scale, we're so used to being able to flip a coin, throw a dice, or run a rand function, a computer, to get a random number, that we forget that the particle has no such tools. And if we postulate that the particle makes truly random decisions, it must have some kind of tool to determine these random outcomes. The much more easier conclusion, which is the Penrose OR conclusion, is that really the particle, quote unquote, decides what it wants to do. So basically, there's particles that are conservative, say, no, tunneling through the barrier, I don't want to. And then there's the rescue rogue party, say, hell yeah, you say I can't go through that, I go through that. That's probably the more likely explanation. And it would also explain where character, qualia, emotions come from. Basically, if not all particles are created equal, if they have distinct character, this could be the reason for our consciousness.
Law says this segregation of hot and cold should never happen of its own accord. But the demon conquers that thermodynamic decree by gathering microscopic information about the particle's motions, information we could never hope to perceive. In doing so, the demon exhibits agency. It has a goal and uses the information it gathers to achieve it. Now, the demon can't really defeat the second law, or at least not forever. To use the information it gathers about particles' motions, the demon has first to record them in a memory of some kind. But any real memory will eventually fill up, and a box of gas contains a lot of molecules. So the memory has to be wiped every so often to make room for new information. That erasure, it turns out, produces entropy. So all the entropy lost by separating hot from cold is recouped by clearing the demon's memory. Yet what the demon achieves is precisely the characteristic of living organisms. It creates and sustains a kind of order and organization in the face of the tendency of the second law to...
I would phrase it a little different here, because basically wiping the memory sounds so like, oh, you have to wipe the memory. It's not really explained why. It's more like keeping up the memory takes energy. So it's hard. You have to constantly put in energy to preserve the entropy. So naturally it tends to dissolve again. The entropy increases, the information gets lost. But it seems like in our brains we can really store energy, information relatively long with relatively little energy that we put in. But entropy wants to rise again, but we can actually keep the entropy from rising.
So what we need to fully understand biological agency, say complex systems theorist Stuart Kauffman and philosopher Philip Clayton, is a theory of organization. That doesn't really exist yet. But the link between organization, information...
Yeah, this is again like, yeah, this does. Basically, this is what Penrose describes in his Or, that basically the microtubules that also exist in these small amoeba that we saw before, these are tiny quantum computers, and basically the quantum states, the quantum collapses of these microtubula get concerted, they get basically aligned to form a consciousness or proto-consciousness in a small amoeba. And this is what the organization looks like. So basically, this is what happens in the brain. The different regions organized together as a quantum computer, and they are interconnected by neurons in a classical computing way. And the full product is our brain and our personality, our consciousness.
Agency is becoming more clear as scientists explore the fertile intersection of information theory, thermodynamics, and life. In 2012, Suzanne Still of the University of Hawaii, working with Gavin Crooks of the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory in California and others, showed that any entity with a goal, like a cell, an animal, or even a tiny demon, needs to have a memory if it is to work efficiently without wasting energy. The agent can use its memory to store a representation of the environment, a kind of simplified model of how the world around it works, which it can then draw upon to make predictions about the future. That allows it to anticipate and prepare for what's to come, and thereby make the best possible use of its energy resources. Using energy efficiently is a prime goal in evolutionary biology. An organism that wastes less energy must devote less time to acquiring it by finding food, say. But Maxwell's demon is aware of events at the molecular level that no living organism can hope to access. And this is what permits it to take control of what looks to us like a random mess of moving particles. How can your goal be best achieved?
But this applies in the macro level, right? We also take in our surroundings, estimate probabilities of outcomes. Like if you see a tiger, okay, what's the likelihood that I can fight it and win, and what's the likelihood that I can run and escape? This is exactly what we do. There's nothing special about the demon, just other than that it's tinier. And basically, if OR is correct, this is exactly the same. Particles decide for themselves, and bigger organisms in their surroundings, in their little world that they move, take in the data, store it, build a model of their world, and react to it. The real question is, when does it really become consciousness, which basically Penrose separates it into proto-consciousness and consciousness, and I would separate it even further and say that's the the proto-consciousness, and then there's the unconscious computation, like in a car. There's subconscious computation, it's in our brains that we're not aware of, and there's the conscious computation. All of them together constitute what is our human consciousness, or mammals' consciousness, or most animals' consciousness. But to a certain degree, these smaller organisms, I don't think they're fully conscious like humans are conscious, but they have a pre or proto-conscious version of it.
Maximize your agency when you're not all-seeing like Maxwell's demon. Most real systems, especially biological ones, are forced to operate on partial knowledge, and so they need to make inferences, guesses, and assumptions. Still, Crooks and their colleagues found that in this case, energy efficiency depends on an ability to focus only on the information that is most useful for predicting what the environment is going to be like moments later, and filtering out the rest. In other words, it's a question of identifying and storing meaningful information, that which helps you attain your goal. The researchers showed that the more useless information the agent stores in its memory, the less efficient its actions. In short, efficient agents are discerning ones.
That's also the reason why many people that are on the autism spectrum can do things like see a skyline of a city once and then draw it in minute detail, but why they struggle in so many other aspects of life, because basically their brain has a defect that is storing too much irrelevant information. Basically, their filters are broken.
There are still many things to be understood here. In general, the environment is not static, but changing, and in fact, the agent affects its own surroundings through its actions. That creates a much trickier scenario. The agent might then be faced with the choice of adapting to circumstances or acting to alter those circumstances. Sometimes it might be better to go around an obstacle, and sometimes to try to tunnel through it. What's more, taking action is only effective when the environment can accommodate that change. There's little point in trying to do something faster than the surroundings can respond. If you stir a cornstarch slurry too fast, it just goes stiff as the grains jam against one another. They don't have time to move out of each other's way. And in real life, agents might have to find good compromises between several perhaps conflicting goals. And how, anyway, does an agent find a good strategy for achieving its goals? Well, this might be easier than it appears. Some scientists have shown that the agency required to solve apparently complex problems can emerge from strikingly simple behavioral rules. You don't necessarily need a big brain to do it, but just the right rules. Other researchers have shown that sometimes Maxwell's demon can work best by taking a gamble on when to open and close the trapdoor, rather than responding to every individual molecule that comes along. Living agents surely have to be gamblers sometimes, because life isn't fully knowable or predictable. Here, then, is a story we can tell about how genuine biological agency could have arisen that doesn't seek any recourse in mysticism. Evolution gives organisms goals. They want food or water, say, but doesn't specify how best to attain them.
And actually, not only evolution gives us goals, we humans at least, and I think most complex mammals to some degree, we can also become aware of our own goals and consciously override them and train ourselves to follow different goals.
It grants them agency to figure it out for themselves. They must be able to generate alternative courses of action in response to essentially identical stimuli, to create options and flexibility. They use their memory, an internal representation of the environment, to predict the outcomes of these different choices and to select what seems likely to be the best one. Organisms will have memories like this if they have been selected to be energy efficient. At any rate, agency is neither a mere byproduct of blind evolutionary forces, nor an illusion produced by our tendency to project human attributes onto the world. Rather, it's a remarkable property that matter can possess, and one we should feel comfortable invoking to explain how some things happen.
I could not have said it better. In fact, I probably couldn't have said it as well. So thanks, Philip Ball, for this comment. This really sums up a lot of my arguments. this is exactly the right point, and this is exactly where so many physicists, biologians, neuroscientists engage in completely meaningless discussions when they basically argue past that distinction.
You see, if we want to explain why a volcanic rock is at a particular location, we can tell a causal story in terms of simple mechanics, devoid of any goal. Heat in the deep earth, along with gravity, produced a convective flow of rock that brought the magma to the surface, and so forth. However, if we want to explain why a bird's nest is in a particular location, it won't do to recount the forces that acted on the twigs to deliver them there. That explanation can't be complete without invoking the bird's purpose in building the nest. We can't explain the microscopic details, all those cellulose molecules in the wood having a particular location and configuration, without calling on higher level principles of agency.
So this is a feedback loop I often talk about. Basically, yeah, sure, the underlying processes have some randomness and some structure with the physical laws, but in the end, the top-down influences it. Looks at the probabilities, learns, influences the probabilities, and so it goes. It's not a simple, straightforward thing, but it's a closed circle, a feedback loop.
The causal story of the nest can never be bottom-up. Agents are real causes of things that happen in the universe.
I'd like to give a big shout out to Philip Ball for his fascinating narrative on this subject. He actually has 3 new books coming out this year, but I think you might most enjoy reading his book called How to Grow a Human, where he examines the new techniques that allow researchers to grow a kind of mini brain from skin cells and what they might mean for our ability to repair, regrow, and redesign the human body. It's available on Amazon at the link in the description. Check it out. Okay?
Yeah, thanks. Shout out to Philip Ball and to Arvin Ash. Thanks for the great video. Guys, be sure to check out the original video, give it a watch, check out Philip Ball's books. Thank you for watching my video. Until next time, bye-bye.